We'll give Mr. Johnson a couple more. Get started. And I guess the first thing is to let ICRC do their graphics and get us all logged into Zoom. Can you? Okay. Let us know when we can start. We can start now. Is that what you're saying? Awesome. Okay. So we can get started with some housekeeping stuff while we're waiting for Mr. Johnson. I can, looking across the board here, with the exception of Mr. Johnson, everyone else is present. I believe that constitutes a quorum. Mr. Bessel, would you confirm that it's a quorum?
Yes, I confirm there is a quorum.
Okay. And there's been an agenda circulated that I intend to follow, and so have heard no objections to it. We have the minutes from the May 18th meeting, which were circulated shortly before this meeting, but I think they represent a bit of just a few corrections from the previous version. So do I have a motion to accept the minutes of the May 18th meeting as amended and circulated?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Now I think I do want to pause for Mr. Johnson, because we are getting into the substantive part of our agenda. So talk amongst yourselves. we were adjourned. We were just kind of pausing, so we're just going to continue here. I'm going to lead off with, I guess, a healthy dose of crow, and for the decision on the development of property at Glendale and Walnut Avenues. I think most people here have read the article that ran in the newsletter 2 weeks ago, and that pretty well says it. The basic point is that when we went to do some final checking, and really I thought we were just tying off loose ends, we came across a 1945 court case in which the village had represented to the Court of Common Pleas in Hamlin County that we were appropriating the property for a public purpose. And having done that, we were advised by our solicitor that we could not, that the land had to be used for a public purpose. So that pretty much ended the discussion. Any delay in getting it out was basically me saying, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" And she kept saying, "Yes, I'm sure." So, I hope that some good came out of this. I apologize for the time that was spent on it, but I hope some good came out of it in that we did highlight the need within the village for a kind of housing that we don't have very much of. And I'm hoping that we can find other ways to develop that housing. And I think there was some appetite for that among the people who were participating in the discussion. So I turn now to the discussion of the potential sale of village-owned property at 10860 Springfield Pike. At its meeting of June 7th, the council voted to direct the GCIC to sell property at this address and agreed to transfer that property to the GCIC. The village is still looking ahead to getting reimbursed for the money that it has put into the property, principally in buying it, which amounts to $46,500. I will say this was not a landslide win for the ordinance. It was a very close vote, as close as it can get, really. It was a 3-3 tie. As the mayor, the only time I do vote is when there's a tie, and I voted to break the tie and pass the ordinance. So that's why we are here, to really discuss what we might do with this property. We are fortunate to have on the board of the GCIC persons representing both sides of that vote on council. So there will be an opportunity for everyone to hear both sides of the story. With that, and we're going to have some public comments. The public will, as always, be limited to 5 minutes. I know that's limiting for people, but it is our standard, and I'm telling you, if we don't adhere to that standard, we will be called on it by a number of people. This under the resolution, then this will be the last thing that the board does at the meeting. It's after they hear from the public comments, after the board has had a chance to talk. The resolution will then be presented for consideration. It will allow authorize the executive director to accept the property, but the acceptance should come at the latest possible time before an actual sale. And this is because if the GCIC actually holds the property for any length of time, there's a potential for a tax to be levied against the GCIC. So we need to be careful about that. And the executive director would be authorized to enter into a seller's agent agreement to market the property. I would assume the first thing that would happen, though, would be the seller's agent would come in and meet with the board, probably in executive session, to discuss the appropriate pricing of the property. This is one of the areas where the Ohio Open Meetings Act does allow us to meet in executive session, outside of public view, for the simple reason that, of course, if the board has to have its discussions of what they think is the best price we can get for the property, if that is made public, then of course that gives a bit of an edge to the buyer or seller, the buyer. Yeah. So we really want to, we have to keep that confidential, and we will. It is possible that the board will, upon hearing the discussion, discussion from the residents, may decide not to accept the property at all, or it may decide that it wants to think about it some more and table the ordinance. And also, it could also then not be even brought up with a motion or a second. So there are some outcomes here other than just passing the ordinance. There is no 3 reads or emergency language for the board. So we can always specify an effective date of what we do. So I just wanted to get all the options out there on the table. Did Bob give you any idea?
Bob Johnson's on Zoom right now. So,
Okay.
Bob, you're in the system. Can we hear you?
Can you hear us? Yes. Okay. So we are ready to go then. And I will ask our solicitor at some point to provide some her views here, but I think that would be best done after we hear from the public comments. So I'm going to open it for public comment, and I believe the first person to have registered to speak is Ron Vischer.
Can I pass them down? Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize I'd had enough copies for the entire audience. One of the things that happened at the council meeting is that before the vote that was taken, there were a couple of relatively, I guess I'd call them legal issues that were on the table, and we took a vote and decided not to continue discussion of those issues. And so I would just like to close the loop on what those issues were to me and provide the GCIC an opportunity to discuss those with the solicitor. As I've mentioned many times before, I'm not an attorney, but I'm always interested in how the law might speak to some of these things. And so I've got a series of handouts here. The first one is a National Historic Landmarks webpage that was posted for about 10 years, but it was posted in the early 2000s. And it's interesting, if you go to the condition portion of this posting, it says the residents of Glendale Historic District have a deep pride in their community. They are determined to maintain the district's boundaries and integrity. They do not want to lose their National Historic Landmark status, partly because, They do not want to lose their landmark status, partly because without it, the highways running through the village would probably be widened, causing much damage to the integrity of the historic district. Although only 13 lots are available for development, residents are determined to keep them zoned residential and undeveloped. The Village Glendale received a CCS grant from MWRO in 2000 to develop a comprehensive plan. And the recommendation is the village should continue the development of the comprehensive community plan, working with the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service regarding assessment and implementation. And when I read that, I thought that the National Park Service was kind of saying that if we implement this plan, in some way we'll be able to keep those 13 lots undeveloped. And I wondered, well, how might that work? I mean, that was a question to me because I didn't see anything that said that that would happen. And so I did a little thinking about it, and I looked at the authority that the village has for the GCIC, and this is the second page. The village designated the GCIC under an Ohio code, section 1724.10, and in that code it says, actions taken under this section shall be in accordance with any applicable planning or zoning regulations. And so I started asking myself, what's applicable planning? And I concluded the village's applicable planning, and support of that is that the GPHPC Planning Commission ordinances enforce the plan for public grounds, and the GPHPC has used these ordinances to enable the quiet zone land use changes. And that's captured in the minutes of the notes of the GPHPC notes relative to their enforcement of that. And so the village plan does provide land use objectives and strategies to keep lots undeveloped. And ordinance that we're talking about today authorizes the GCIC to sell a lot for housing. But selling a lot for housing appears outside the authority designated by council unless it's in accordance with the applicable planning that's in the statement 1724.10. So my question is exactly how this works. It appears that either it has to be unapplicable planning, or what the GCIC does has to be in accordance with it. And so that's kind of a question, can the GCIC sell the lot if it's not within the village plan? That leads to the second topic, which is the zoning topic of the lot itself. And I captured a portion of the zoning code and highlighted some of it, and this is zoning is a very, very complex matter to me. You can really get lost in the weeds, but the one thing that I highlighted in red is that if the boundary lines of the parcel along their entire length touch lands under other ownership prior to 1934, or later in the paragraph 1943, and have not been changed, then you can get an exception to the lot area regulations. And the lot area we're talking about is 0.39 acres, and the zone we're talking about requires a half-acre lot. And you can look at this in the picture that I printed out from the Hamilton County Auditor site that shows that in 1964,
You have about a minute.
the street was vacated, and that changed the size of the lot, and because of the shape of the lot, it also shortened the boundary on the adjoining property. So the boundary was changed on an adjoining property, and it kind of begged the question to me, if that is what occurred, then is this lot under the grandfather clause of the village zoning code? And I was thinking about that a little bit more, and so I looked at the plan of, and the next page here, I looked at the plan of village plan in 1944. Kathy the solicitor got back to us really quickly on this, and thank you very much, with a good thorough opinion, and said it really depended on some of the dates of some things. And so I wondered what this lot looked like in 1944. And so I found the lot on a map. I didn't find it discussed specifically, but on the map, it's indicated as a commercial lot.
Your time has
And
expired.
that kind of caused me to beg the question of how can a commercial lot be grandfathered for residential use? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have someone else who wants to speak?
Rebecca Isaacs, 22 Creekwood. I spoke briefly, the last meeting, thank you, because I hadn't registered. I didn't know I had to do that. So briefly, I was born in Glendale, like over 60 years ago, and born on Sheffield Road, gravel road, no development. My parents moved us to Magnolia so that we could be in town. Then we bought a house out on Woodbine. Then we bought a lot and built a house out on Oak Drive, where I lived actually across the street from Dr. Todd and Mrs. Todd for most of my childhood. So I got deep Glendale roots. Went east for school, college, stayed decades.
Could you bring your mic down just a
Sure.
little bit towards
Sure,
you?
sure, sure.
You have to get close to these mics to be heard. Thank you.
It's a COVID thing.
Oh,
And I moved back. I decided to move back home. So I understand the challenges that will come with that as I age. It's not going to be easy. But I decided to come home. And I came home right before the pandemic. And everything got shut down. So all of my plans of reconnecting and everything kind of died off there. But in the course of that is when this topic of the development out on Glendale Avenue aroused Johnny's Park. And because of that, I think a whole lot of people paid attention because they were locked in, locked down, locked home. And it made me do a lot of soul searching about my roots in Glendale, what Glendale meant to me, the traditions of Glendale. With this gentleman's suggestion at the last meeting to go read that 2000 village plan, which adopted in 2002, I did. And I read it with great interest. It's a remarkable piece of work. It is incredibly forward-thinking, comprehensive. The statistics that are in there are mind-blowing. Today, for instance, I was reading the cut-through traffic flow in the year 2000 on Morse Avenue. Over 2,000 cars in a 24-hour period. And I was thinking of if that development had gone through. I want to thank all you guys for what you do for this village, the time that you give, the sacrifices that you make. I don't know, I hope that people express that on a really regular, often basis, because without you, the village wouldn't run. So it's really, really important. But I also want to urge the spirit of the founders of this village. And one of the reasons that we're all here, and one of the reasons that I came home, and one of the reasons that there was such an opposition, it was so emotional for people because of the connection, whether it was a family connection, whether it's childhood memories, but those buffer zones, those green spaces, those green belts, that's a night and day difference for the village. If in 1944, those people that did the original village plan would have had any idea of the encroachment, if they would have seen what happened to Chester Road, which is now like Sunset Boulevard, if they would have seen where that high school was moved right up against Creekwood, if they would have seen Kroger, Smithfield, the industrial valley that Woodlawn built, odds are they would have purchased more land. I cannot emphasize enough how important these spaces are to us. And I urge you to, as you go forward and make these decisions, and I understand the necessity, I understand budget, no one holds that. That's, you don't want to raise tax, you don't want to raise a tax, you don't institute a levy. There's a possible solution. Thank you. Everyone would like the older people in Glendale to be able to stay in Glendale. These are emotionally charged issues. And it's hard for people then to get up and speak against that because they don't want to appear to be speaking against reasonable budgetary issues or forcing people in Glendale to move out. But I would urge you to understand the tradition, because those green spaces, our tree canopy, our wildlife, those are the qualities of life. They contribute greatly. And that's the spirit of Glendale. And that's what makes us unique. That's what makes us unique. And I just want to ask each of you to please keep that in your mind as you go forward and make very important decisions. And I want to thank, again, each and every one of you for everything that you do for this village. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody on Zoom who wanted to speak?
No, Mayor, we do not have anyone on Zoom.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to ask our solicitor to give us just some thoughts or reactions to some of the arguments, legal questions that have been raised here.
Thank you, Mayor. With respect to the 172410, this section provides authority for the CIC to do a number of things. And as Mr. Vischer pointed out, B1 does in fact have state that actions taken under this section shall be in accordance with any applicable planning or zoning regulations. And it goes on to state that under this section, this type of sale is done pursuant to a plan adopted by the CIC. This is certainly a section that the CIC can act under, but this is one where, I'll kind of just paraphrase here, where the village may enter into an agreement with the CIC to provide the following, and it goes into a series of different purposes. This particular section is not the one under which the CIC would be currently acting. This is one where if the council directs the CIC, we'll give you the property, but you must make a plan, and then we need to adopt it and move forward. That is something that may occur, but that's not what's occurring here. Rather, here's kind of the more commonly used provision under which the CIC may act. This is awfully long here, and I may have lost it here. B2, this is just the authorization for a CIC to sell or lease any property or interest in property without competitive bid. You know, it goes on, but basically for purposes of your organizational purpose as a CIC. So that's the section that CICs very commonly act under, where they simply accept the property, follow their own organizational purpose, and other factors. To the extent that actions taken under this section shall be in accordance with any planning or zoning regulations, while that's under B1 and that does not apply, what they mean in that instance is the planning and zoning laws as they exist. So the plans that are adopted are policy documents that are meant to be aspirational and to guide development. But when they're speaking in those terms, they're saying, even though this is a public entity who own the property, they're giving it to someone acting as their agent and they're developing it. Make no mistake that you do not get out of the zoning regulations and the zoning laws. So that's really truly the intent of that, where B1 applies. But then with respect again to the plan, there are really a couple different occasions that are the kind of principal driving purposes of an adopted plan by the village, and not the one under B1, but the traditionally adopted village plans like the ones we've been discussing today. One is to build policy, and that would then serve as a basis for enacting any of these zoning laws that are adopted by the village. And the second one is it can be part of the evidence that may be considered if there's an administrative review by the zoning board for a variance or something like that. So any of those occasions, then you're going to want to look at your plan, and it's going to be one of a number of factors that you may give weight as a council to the planning and zoning policy, but it in no way is a binding document on property rights and developability and saleability of property within the village. Let's see, with respect to the grandfathering issue, there, Mayor, Mr. Bishop.
I'll allow a question, but we're going to have to keep it, limited.
Title of that is section 1721.24.10. And so when I read that sentence under the section, I thought it referred to what was called the section rather than paragraph A or paragraph B. In your interpretation of the law, says that it's only the paragraph.
Yes.
And then if it's under the paragraph involved and the GCIC is acting under the paragraph C, I guess,
B2.
then that says that there really is no plan involved in what the GCIC is doing in selling this property. They didn't make a plan.
Well, the plan is that the CIC has adopted a code of regulations and has its articles of incorporation, and it has a very specific purpose both under Chapter 1724 and that code, and they must abide by that organizational purpose.
No, but I mean, my question is really selling this property without a plan for why we sell it or why we wouldn't sell it or we didn't do anything like that. I just want to understand that there was no planning involved. It was it's authorized as an action, and we're going to take the action. And that was one comment. And the second comment is relative to the responsibilities we have as a certified local government to meet the responsibilities of being the National Historic Park District. I understand that the CIC doesn't have to worry about the plan. And that's a big deal. I mean, this was an observation, this is a big deal. I mean, I'll have to think about that. I think the residents would like to know that the CIC is the way we get around the HPC, it's the way we get around the village plan. It really is a big deal.
Well, Ron, I think you're making an assumption that we're trying to get around something. I mean, that's the inference that you're making. I don't see the CIC specifically trying to get around anything. I think, as Kathy mentioned, we're trying to address what our responsibility as the CIC was kind of formed. And I think we're talking about some unmet needs within the village itself that were identified, which was additional housing for seniors that would like to stay in Glendale, and also our ability to recuperate some of the funds that the village spent to acquire these properties, and therefore provide some additional funds for the village so that we can address other needs that the village has.
I've got no critique of what the GCIC is doing. My comment is simply a legal comment that if indeed the GCIC has the authority to operate outside the village plan, that might have implications to the certified community or CL. And then secondly, the residents who take great pride in being a planned community might have a point of view about whether we should be giving things without plan.
Okay, I am going to cut the colloquy off at this point. Anything further from our solicitor or Mr.
Sure.
Bogran?
I will say any of this property that's going to be developed would be subject to all of the zoning code requirements, and the zoning code, zoning map are adopted pursuant to the plan at some point. So at all stages, just like any other property development, we'll have to go through the same planning, Board of Appeals, whatever kind of necessary review would take place for that. With respect to the grandfathering issue, there's really a couple points. It's not 100% clear right now whether this property is grandfathered. There is a clause in the zoning code that says there is a lot of record, and it says any lot created before 1983, and it defines lot of record. But your code stops short of then taking that phrase and saying that parcels that have that status are grandfathered. It says that parcels that have that status with respect to lot width have the lot width issue grandfathered. So if they're too narrow, you can ignore that if they were that parcel was made before 1983. And there was one other kind of minor thing like that, but for whatever reason, the code does not go as far as I guess we would probably anticipate it to go, where it said lot of record pre-1983 is grandfathered. But there is another provision that kind of speaks to the grandfathering in 154.54, going on about the 1934 date and the 1943 date with respect to the square footage, width, and a kind of a more of a comprehensive list of the characteristics that make this lot appear non-conforming. And in this, it's kind of a unique situation because in one sense, yes, the boundary did change, but lot of record as a concept. Yes. Mayor, David had informed me that the copy that you had passed out of the resolution was the second instead of the third version.
Okay.
I had the third version, so.
All right.
Okay. How many do we need?
How about
Sure.
10 or 12? Thanks.
So with respect to the right-of-way issue, that does not undermine any potential grandfathering. And that is because any sort of rights vested in this lot, if it is in fact grandfathered, the idea of grandfathering is that where something that is out of the control of the property owner by governmental action imposes that limitation, that your rights were vested before then. And that includes both if the zoning area changed, or in this case, with respect to the right-of-way, while that does change the boundary, in this particular instance, the petitioner was the property owner on the other side of the right-of-way. I think it was Mr. Cartwright, but I may be way off on that name. And with that, under the state statute now and at the time, it says that where there is a street vacation, it's split down the center, and both sides, either side of that automatically gets that piece of the parcel of the right of way. So while this was vacated and that did change the boundary, I would consider that as not being a factor, but for that street vacation, it would have stayed at the boundary it stayed at, which then leads us to the second question, which is the boundary without that right-of-way issue. When was that created? That would require a little bit more research, and Mr. Vischer did. It is interesting. The 1944 map appears to show it created there. That would require a little bit more research to determine what date was it created. Is it vested because it existed before the zoning was adopted, or the zoning had this limitation with the bigger lots? That's something that we could certainly look into. I did try to go to the county building to just open the big book and look at it that way, but they got rid of the book. So then it turns into a big whole, title search thing. And I thought, if that's something that the CIC wants to do, or to allow the potential buyer to do, then that's something that can be done and that can be determined. Worst case scenario in this instance, if this lot does not have any sort of rights vested with respect to the area, that is something that would then be an opportunity for the buyer to seek a variance. And that's just one of those, it would be a completely independent process. The CIC can allow them to do that as part of their due diligence period while the agreement is signed and they're going through that process. The applicant would be the applicant, not the CIC. And they would go through the Board of Appeals and request that, just like any other individual might do. And then I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I had to cover.
I guess I would just add that there does seem to be a kind of question on a spectrum, if you will, of what is the legal status of the village plan, the 2000 village plan. And it is true that when the Planning Commission is considering a conditional use, for example, it is required to consider the consistency of the conditional use with the village plan. And they do typically look at the 2000 village plan to make that judgment. At the same time, it is not exactly without a specific mandate to consider it, it is not exactly a law. It's not exactly a binding law. If you look at the discussion that went around the adoption of that village plan, at one point, a councilman said, well, the plan is only a recommendation. And the solicitor added, yes, the plan is not the law. So it's and it does strain me a little bit to think that somehow in adopting the village plan, we made ordinances out of this entire book. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. We are going, but what I want to assure Mr. Vischer, I want to assure any residents who might be listening to us here that we are going to do nothing that we are concerned would jeopardize our National Historic District designation. That we will look at that very carefully, make that judgment, and it will lean towards being very conservative in that regard. Certainly not for the sale of some small one third or so acre lot. We just wouldn't do it. At the same time, I'd remind everyone, we are acting at the behest of council here. When you say the CIC needs a plan, in this particular instance, we are following a direction of council if we decide to put this property on the market to sell it for a price, whatever price can be gotten for it. That is our role here. So council ultimately has to decide, is this a concern to them from a village plan standpoint, which they would look on as a policy question and not so much as a legally binding restriction on what they can do. I don't think we have anyone else then who would like to speak. So I'm opening up the floor to council members who would like to just weigh in on this. Let's let council speak. If Mr. Bessel, would you still?
That's fine. It'd be interesting to know, what is the value?
Microphone this time, because the question Mr. Bessel asked at council when we were discussing this is, what's the value of the lot? And of course, the value of real estate until it's sold is very difficult to determine, of course. But I think you can look at nearest neighbor lots and see what they were sold for. And the nearest neighbor lot, which is a half-acre lot with a house on it, sold for $20,000. And I think that's important for everyone to understand. We're not talking about a lot of money as we're having this conversation, and I'm not concerned about a lot of money. I'm concerned in my comments with the process that we're following, make sure that that process is a process that can't be challenged later by someone who may not agree with the actions the GCIC is doing, and we just should be very thorough in what we do. But the best answer today is the lot is $20,000 minus the house, the value of a house, then inflated from 2013 to 2021.
2013, okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
Ron, so can I ask a question? Your value is based on the auditor's website, or what's the basis?
That's the auditor's website has
Okay.
history of sales.
So it's the assessed value of the land today,
And so it wasn't an assessment, it was a sale in 2013.
2000. Okay.
Okay, of a nearest neighbor lot. which
Oh,
was
okay. So not the land itself.
Not
Okay.
the lot we're talking about. Okay.
Any further discussion?
Well, I had, in the council meeting, I serve on council as well, so it may get a little confusing, but in the council meeting, I changed my mind on this whole venture, I guess. Initially, when we discussed it amongst this group, it seemed logical, it seemed feasible, and we would be able to hopefully recoup our cost and To your point, $20,000 on the auditor's site. I think, what did the village pay for this lot? Don, do you recall?
45,000, I believe it was 45,000.
Way back some other
96.
time, 96. So it's all over the map. And if the sale you're referencing included a house, the way the auditor splits that sometimes doesn't follow logic either. So there's all kinds of factors that go into that. My logic and my reason for rethinking my position, and I wasn't 100% strongly, let's sell this and have a house built there, but it seemed to make sense. I tipped in that direction because it seemed to make sense, recover the cost, add a house, add a resident, add a future tax revenue, which really isn't very much. And even the sale of that lot is not going to solve the village financial issues. Even at 45,000, you recover your cost, and that's fine. But also consider this, in looking at the entire park, the land that surrounds it, along Route 4, there's one parcel the village does not own. It's got a little house on it, but the village owns everything else. And that struck me as, would it make sense for the village to eventually own the entirety of that right up to Route 4 versus a little house being built in addition to the house that's there? And the value, the major investment that we have in our parks, okay, we have a very large investment in our parks, and this may sound backwards to some people, but I'm going to present it in a way that makes sense to me. We have maintenance and a maintenance staff that cares for our parks. We have maintenance of all the playground equipment and purchase of new playground equipment. And so to me, this parcel of land is one more investment in that park. And so why would you consider another 1/3 acre as an investment in the park? Recently, I have seen the park used much more often than in the past. As a matter of fact, this spring, it reminded me of when my kids were growing up, and there were 30-some families there for one age group. And then there were 20-some families for another age group. At one point, you couldn't find a place to park, and the parking was actually out on Sharon Road for practice and for games and all the things going on in the park. We're also considering, and I believe it has traction based on a letter that I read, we're considering building tennis courts up in that park. And the communication I read indicated that there is interest from a lot of people and pledges, I won't go as far as commitments, but potential pledges of $80,000 towards new tennis courts. That's pretty good. Now, if you were to build more tennis courts, you would lose the parking that is so strongly needed up there. So then where would you put more parking? I would not advocate this 1/3 acre, as someone suggested that could be a parking lot. It's not good access. And I think a parking lot right off of Route 4 that isolated in the middle of the night is probably not a good idea. So, but what are you going to do in total with this park started to become my question. How do you deal with all of these things? Obviously, if you add tennis, remove parking from an already parking issue, the addition of tennis is going to create more of a parking issue. So that put me in the frame of mind, let's take a step back and think about what we're doing. I don't want to focus on the negatives, but there is an issue with water in that park, and the water runoff. Now we've got it contained and it's controlled and it goes in a spot that doesn't affect the park. But this 1/3 acre is higher or as high as anywhere else in the park. And if you build a house and a driveway and et cetera, that's more impervious surface. It's going to come right down towards the A diamond. It's in the middle of center field. And the A diamond, this is too much detail, but I'm a baseball guy. The A diamond is already compromised because we had to work a deal with getting the water to flow correctly. It goes behind the infield, And so there's a drop off behind the infield, and that's just not good. But anyway, that's just an example of, that water is going to come right towards the outfield, and we've already got it controlled. So we need to think about, again, what we're doing from a water issue too, potentially. So let me make sure I've covered all my points. So the value of this, I guess, in a sense for me, it's a dollar value. And once the land has been sold, the next time you'll never get it back. And if you do try to get it back, it's going to have a house on it, and it's going to cost $400,000 to buy it again, or whatever that would be. And then it also has a value as a village amenity, and it is right adjacent to a park that is highly functioning in Glendale that everybody loves. And for the sake of $40,000, if we could get it, does it make sense to take that plus $1,000 or less in additional tax revenue to potentially compromise a piece of land that could be useful to us in the future right next to one of our parks? Let me scan this, Don, and I'll give it back to you. So that's my point. Let's stop and think about what we're doing before we put it up for sale and make it part of an overall plan. One last comment. There is also land that was donated to the village east of Summit Park that used to be part of the Castellini estate. And there again that's potential for doing something, not with housing, but potential for doing something with park. So again, sort of, and you couldn't because it was designated for park when it was given. So again, let's look at the overall park itself and see what we want to do before we make any decisions. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion?
So I appreciate Mike's passion on baseball and the parks and everything else. I love parks. I love trees. I tend to be more pragmatic on, I try not to get too emotional about all the elements that surround us. Lived here for 35 years. Glendale has more baseball fields than any of our surrounding communities. Is that right or wrong? It's just a fact. So I think Mike is totally right that I think the village should look at the use of our parks, the use of all the space that we have. I don't think it's properly used. I don't think it's a good value for the village the way it stands today. It's grass, lots of grass. Doesn't cost that much to cut the grass. But I think we need more of a comprehensive plans around our park systems. How many parks should we have? Baseball, soccer, other activities, shelters, and everything else. We were spending a lot of money in the play areas, which I think is great. We don't have that many kids that use them, but we have, playgrounds that I think will be the latest and greatest by the time we complete the one on the east side of town, and then we're going to be upgrading the one at Summit for sure. When I first looked at Summit, and as the treasurer of the village, I'm always looking for opportunities. How can the village bring in more revenue to enable more residents to enjoy more things in Glendale? And a lot of residents, the majority of them, don't use the parks. And I'll tell you this because I walk my dog through the parks every place in Glendale, and I know who's there, who's not there. So I look at it from mainly too much from a financial side on how do we provide more amenities for more of the residents of Glendale. So as we looked at lifestyle homes, which I think is an unmet need for the Glendale community, I thought that as an opportunity that maybe we could use part of Summit and still have baseball and still have tennis, but use part of Summit to have more of a development community that incorporates a lot of the needs that the village has. Still maintaining parks, but leveraging what we currently have to also address some of the other needs that a lot of the other residents have. And when I say that, I'm not saying lifestyle home, but more revenue for our community is only better. We're on a shoestring budget every single year. We're just barely making it. And Glendale needs to thrive, not just stay even and, in my mind, decline in appearance the way we have been over the last 10 plus years. So that piece of parcel is not going to break or make Glendale, but I think we need to have more comprehensive plan for how much park do we have? What should we be doing with all the parks? Should we have a border? Should we be planting more trees in that little parcel? I mean, there's, half a dozen trees on the whole parcel. Maybe we do need some more trees in that area. Maybe we need to plant more trees where we have grass. So there's a lot of things that we can consider. So I'm not ready to say we need to sell the land now, but I think it opens up a lot of questions that we need to consider, not only the CIC, but council in general, on developing what I would call a more comprehensive plan rather than just, trying to survive year to year based on the budget that we have. What are we going to do now? So I do encourage council and the board here to envision how do we create a more comprehensive plan that addresses several of the needs that I mentioned. So money, lifestyle homes, playgrounds, trees, the 2000 plan is a guide. I think we need to be looking at what's the next plan. The world's accelerating pretty fast. We need to keep up, or we're just going to spiral down to oblivion here in Glendale. You can see what's happening in Tri-County. We need to be able to thrive and not just stay even and decline. So, and that's not cutting down trees. I'm not in favor of cutting down trees, but it's let's be a little more comprehensive around all this stuff. So,
Is there any other discussion? I'd like to hear from some board members who haven't spoken yet.
Don, I agree with what these two gentlemen have already said. It seems like we have the resources that lend themselves to a comprehensive analysis of our inventory of park space, our needs and opportunities that might spring from them. Of course, that can't happen overnight, but it seems like we also have time with respect to this small parcel that we're not in a rush. We don't know if it's even a buildable lot, if it's not conforming, if it satisfies any requirements for that. So I don't have a problem in pumping the brakes a bit and taking a breath and having a more comprehensive look at the big picture, to be honest.
Anyone? I mean, for background, from my standpoint, as I said, I'm the one who broke the tie here. So usually I don't have to explain my votes because I don't get to take votes at council meetings. But in this case, I did, and just to explain it. This had gone through 3 reads at council. There had been, I think, one council member expressing concern about it at the time. And there was not a lot of objection until the 3rd read. And maybe it's there's a syndrome in psychology called approach avoidance. When you get to a big decision, the closer you get to making the decision, the more you tend to hold back from it. I don't know. But my thought at the time was council had considered this matter for some time. Probably the collegiality of the board here and the informality that we allow ourselves to just have discussions back and forth. Well, we would never have a discussion like we just had with Mr. Vischer at council. And there might be some opportunity here for people to come in and tell us, oh, here's how you could use this property. Here's because right now, I mean, the way it looked to me, and I'd been out there and I'd walked around the property and that, it did not seem to have very much of a purpose within either the village or the park. It's kind of an appendix off to the side. I said, all right, if we could get at least part of the $45,000 that the village is carrying it for on the books back, let's do it. But if there's some real ideas as to what to do with it, and again, I don't think that it's going to solve our parking problem, and I think we all agree on that. So there has to be something else. And if not, if we don't need the property, if we, after listening to all the options, we conclude we don't need the property, then we can continue, we can go forward on the sale. For now, we don't have to accept the direction from council. We can just table it but I would like to at least have some thoughts from people as to, well, what are the next steps here? What do we want to invite some people to come in and present ideas to us? We have a plan for the parks. Now, it is not written down. It is not what you would call a comprehensive one, but park by park, we are, and Jeff, as our chair of the Parks Committee as well, no, of the Playgrounds and Recreations Committee, is well aware of this, that we have already done a lot of work up on Washington Park. We are doing a substantial upgrade on the equipment at Cleveland Park. And I think we all are thinking ahead and thinking that Summit Park is next in line. And these typically, when you want to say, is it a plan? Yeah, our plan is to try to get a grant to pay for at least half of whatever cost there is. Summit's a beautiful park, I think. Now, it's got the equipment in it is dated, and there's some other problems with it. But we're going to keep going. We're going to try to find, hopefully for next year, to do something good and upgrade Summit Park. And in the process, I think we'll want to address parking. Right now, we have this huge blacktop area down there that is not striped or anything, and so cars just come in and park at random. I think looking at it, it looks like you could fit more cars in there if you did if you took a more comprehensive look at it. I'm telling you this though, if somebody puts in those tennis courts there and that causes a parking problem, I think that's great for the village. I think having those new tennis courts and I'll take the problem of parking for that. So that's just where I'm at, but I'm interested in thoughts as to next steps. What are the things that people on the board might like to know in order to proceed with this?
Hey, Don.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Bob.
Just again, kind of a step back. So $45,000 doesn't solve any long-term Glendale financial problems. I think the bigger question is there room at Summit? And I have no real idea if you could have lifestyle homes. I still like what Don said last time about having lifestyle homes somewhere in Glendale, and it's just not a lot of places you can put them. But is there a place, if we looked at a plan for Summit, that you could put lifestyle homes? And I think the financial considerations are so minor, we almost shouldn't do it. The lifestyle homes, in my opinion, makes a lot of sense. I think we lose some good Glendale residents because there isn't that sort of thing available. And I look at Summit and think, is there not a better way to design Summit that you could have a lifestyle home somehow as a part of it?
One of the things, if I may, to answer your question there, Mr. Johnson, one of the details about Summit is, and it's important to keep in mind, the top half, the northern half of the park is designated to be only for park use or recreational public use. Right. So any development would require a fair amount of careful planning as well as title searching for the southern portion of the park to be sure the same restrictions don't exist there before any development of that park would be worth considering or pursuing.
I just think all that investigation is worthwhile if we could get the kind of lifestyle homes that would allow people in Glendale potentially sell one of these big old houses, and we keep a wonderful resident in a lifestyle home. I think if you're looking at just whether or not we're going to sell something that's attached to Summit Park, to me, the only reason to do it would be if we could put these lifestyle homes in, because $45,000, like I keep saying, is just not any long-term solution for Glendale. And it's not my call, but to me, there has to be some raising of taxes in some way for us to be what I think we want to be in Glendale. I mean, I think the money is a separate issue than the lifestyle home, and maybe a more a way, if it's possible, to develop Summit. So I'm done.
So
Anything-
one thing, Don, that and Mike brought it up, because around Summit, there is land that was donated on the east side, but you can't access it because there's a fence there. So that's part of the, what's the overall comprehensive plan for our parks? What's really the footprint of the park? I mean, there's other land that's also was donated, I think from the Allens, that's also not far from there. There's not a good visual of where is all the land that Glendale can use today, and what are all the restrictions? What should we be doing with this land? We have lots of trees. Maybe we need to plant more trees in some areas. I mean, I look at Summit, and you could do, including some of the other land that Mike was mentioning, you could do such a fantastic development that incorporates everything that one would ever need, in my mind, in that space that we have there. Maintain tennis courts, maintain baseball, provide green belt space, provide a lot of different things. To me, the only comprehensive plan that I know of our parks, and this is just me, and don't take it wrong, is we're adding more gym equipment or replacing gym equipment, and mowing the grass and keeping up with the, with the shelters, making sure those don't collapse anymore. But do we have a plan, or is that the plan? So, Jeff.
I'm listening to Mike's and
you got to get closer to the mic.
I'm trying to listen to all of the options and opinions. My initial reaction was that it's a piece of underutilized, if not utilized at all, piece of property. But as you mentioned, if this could be combined with the purchase of a smaller piece of property and then developed along all of the property owned along the water tower or by the water tower along Route 4, that would make sense. I think looking at the size and scope of Summit Park and what percentage of it is used, it does have 3 baseball fields, but once baseball spring is over, for the most part, the park goes pretty much underutilized. And if some portion of it could be developed to achieve the goal of homes that appeal to others, whether they're older people or younger, it would make sense to utilize that. If we measured the number of square feet we have per resident in Glendale in parks, I think we all own at least a square meter of land. So we have a generous amount of parks, and I'd like to see them better utilized in terms of development without infringing on the sensitivities of keeping Glendale green, if you will. And that's possible, I think, with good planning. And all of the ideas that have been presented and might be presented, as we sit here today, if we postpone it again, we're using a phrase that one of our councilmen has mentioned before about other issues, and that's kicking it down the road. I would suggest that if we table it, that we set a timeline and say, okay, by the end of the year or by 3 months from now, we get a formal group together to say, here are the ideas, let's do something, or put it aside permanently because we keep addressing this without making any progress.
I think making that plan and setting that timeline is what this group should be doing. That should be our work, whatever plan it is.
I'm sorry, Mike, did I interrupt?
No,
You know, I
Joan, you're not quite close enough to your microphone.
so when we talk about park space, green space, parks in the village, as I understand it from the village plan from 2000, that only 5% of village property is park space, 5%. So it's a pretty small number. And green space is what I'm talking about. And I think the question is, if we're going to talk about how do we analyze the parks that we have, and to Jeff's point about, you know, he's the head of the parks and rec, so he has a better understanding of what's going on in these parks. You know, what does underutilized mean? You know, I think village residents want access to open spaces, parkland. They want access to nature. They want to be able to, of course, use the space for sports, their kids' sports, tennis, you know, playgrounds, that kind of thing. But there are residents who, like Mike Bogran, walk their dog, which is a good use of park space. Quiet contemplation walks by residents for exercise. You know, so I think we have to be careful about what we say, you know, underutilized or how we utilize the park space. And I don't think we've ever established, I'm sure we haven't, a standard for what we consider to be, you know, what are the highest priorities for park space? What's the best use of the land? And, you know, what is not the best. So I think we have to consider all those things when we're talking about, you know, what the village wants to do, what council expects to, or what we can expect council to give us some direction on about park space, and, you know, what standards should there be for how that space should be used. I don't think we're there yet.
No.
You. Okay. Now a little wake up call. You know, if I don't know that the GCIC at this point is the appropriate mechanism for making decisions on our strategic planning on parks.
Right.
In general, we were conceived, and CICs are conceived for all kinds of different reasons. Kathy has told me about some of them that, you know, go crazy on stuff, but I think our idea was that we learned from the sale of one piece of real estate that the village, because it's a statutory village, we really didn't have very much flexibility in how we could market real estate. So to some extent, the idea behind creating the CIC was to give the village an ability to do what any seller of real estate does, which is market it, negotiate when sale, you know, with people come in, don't just go in and take the high bidder and call it a day. You know, it would be going a bit beyond our mandate from council, what council at least conceived of when we were created, to then take off and do a plan of the parks. And besides that, we don't really have that expertise in the group anyway. So it would be a whole other area to get into. I'm looking for a decision. And if we decide we don't want to do this, then, you know, let's not do it. Or is there some other information, like having a chance to maybe spend another month between meetings, actually physically going out to the property itself, take a look at it, maybe invite some ideas from residents and others as to what alternatives uses there are for the property. I mean, people, you know, look down their nose at $45,000. I don't look down my nose at $45,000. And Lord have mercy, during the budget hearings, I think we talked about how we actually cut a couple of $2,000 park benches from the budget. So nobody should say, if we had $45,000 in hand, hey, we could have bought 20 of those benches, you know. So, you know, it's.
But Don, that $45,000 would occur one time. it's not something that's sustainable. And I'm not poo-pooing that amount of money. I just think that what you are potentially trading, and then try to be as clear as I can. I agree with you. This group should not be studying what are we going to do with all these parks and can we develop them without guidance. The point I was trying to make is that there should be a step back, a look again at this park, this particular piece of land as it relates to the park. This group, Jeff, your park committee is the group that should look at that. If I wasn't clear before, this is the group that should be looking at it. And I just think it's premature right now to put that piece of land up for sale.
Can I go ahead and make a motion then to table this discussion? Or excuse me, table this?
So we don't have anything to table at this point because there's nothing on the table. There's no motion before it. So what we would be talking about is just continuing the discussion, continuing the dialogue. But I'd like to just get some ideas as to what it is we're going to learn in the next month. Say before we've been doing monthly meetings, and I think it works fairly well. The question is, what do we want to know? I mean, to me, the question is, for the village, what is the best use for this piece of land? Now, if it turns out that for some reason we can't sell it at all, then that's a whole other question. Or if it turns out that it would compromise our National Historic designation, and I think that's something that falls to the village administration and office to do some research on. I don't know that we're going to do a full-blown, in-depth look at the question, but we're going to at least get some direction. And of course, before we would actually sell the property, we would have to have a very clear idea on the questions that have been raised so far.
But I mean, we do need an end time. That's what I'm thinking. That I'm not saying it's got to be 30 days or 60 days. I'm saying there's got to be some resolution.
Yeah. Well, my hope would be that we would set a date for our next meeting tonight. And then if at the end, if at that meeting, we really find we don't know much more than we know now, or we just aren't in any, don't have any real interest in moving forward with any particular plan, then we say, okay, we're not going to do that. But we might at that point say, well, you can't think of anything better to do with this property. It's off to the side. It that isn't serving any purpose right now. Nobody's using it. So
Don, what
Is it the purview of this committee to make those decisions? I would think that it's the purview of either the council or the Park and Recreation Committee to make those decisions. And whatever that decision is, then the CIC, I would assume, would execute. So we won't be making those decisions as a committee here, right?
Yeah. That's where I was going with that, because Don, you were asking what should we be doing next. So I think there was a question that Kathy might still be researching around, maybe if there were some other limitations on the property, so that if a potential buyer might have some question, we might be able to answer parts of it. I'm not sure if that you hinted at that, or the buyer would be doing the research themselves for
Just the grandfathering issue. That's just a matter of looking down the chain of title and seeing when that was platted.
Okay, so that's one action item right there. So we'll have that. To me, and this is just me personally. I mean, I've looked at that piece of land backwards and forwards. I've walked through there probably 20 times. I don't envision that piece of property will have any relevance whatsoever to anything that the village does with Summit or not Summit or anything else. It's just hanging out there. It is what it is. I mean, my preference would be you put a for sale sign there, we agree on what the price is, and we see what happens. That would be just me, because I don't think council or the park board or the playgrounds, and we'll do anything within the next year to address anything around parks. This is just me, okay? Politics in Glendale is very slow at moving on anything. So we're just going to be looking at this thing for a long time until someone on council decides to take a very active plan and develop a comprehensive plan for all the parks and everything else, and that's going to take a while. If we sell that lot, no one is going to lose any sleep over that. And actually, maybe a Glendale resident would decide to do something with that and maybe plant a lot of trees around there and said, hey, we've got trees now on this parcel of land, and that's all I want to do with that. Great. We've got another barrier there against Route 4. We can proceed with that. The village may get us $45,000 back, maybe more. And we'll have that money for the 2022 budget, which, by the way, we need to be submitting here very soon. And so more money for the Glendale is better. If we just stand back here and just wait, nothing's going to happen. So, you know, if we had a way to make a motion, if we're allowed to do that, my motion would be is Kathy does her work to get the grandfather elements together so that we have a little more information. And the CIC gives the authority to David to advertise or put this land for sale. That would be just me.
Another thing I would mention was acting under 1724.10B2. The key language in there is that you're doing this without competitive bidding. And you have to ask yourself, what does that afford you as a body that the council can't have? So yeah, the bidding, you know, highest bidder, that's one thing that you may also share with the village, but you have the ability to say, we're going to put a deed restriction on it that makes that buyer ensures that they develop it into productive use as a single family house within 5 years, rather than, you know, the village can just place it up for bid and somebody might be a land speculator that allows it to sit for another 30 years vacant. So there are just certain, you know, those sorts of limitations and covenants can be placed on this property. You can think of different things that you might want to put some kind of covenant for some green space along the park adjacent side. There are all kinds of minor elements like that that you as the board have the ability to do, so that if you do want to put it up for sale, it's not just about selling it. It's about saying, what are the strategies that we think would help make this an opportunity beyond what the village can do by itself?
Okay, I'm going to just resist a little bit spending more on legal fees for Kathy to go research the grandfathering issue, not to mention the historic designation issue, because I don't sense that's what's holding this board back at this point. It's really a policy question in our own minds: is it a good idea to sell this property, or is there something better that could be done with it? And so what I'd like to do is try to at least take a month. You know, we do whatever we individually want to do, but put out an invitation, you know, just in a newsletter or whatever, to invite people to come to the next CIC board meeting and tell us, what do you think? What do you think what do you think should be done with this property? And, you know, then this board could look at it and say, hey, there was really nothing there. There's no big ideas coming in. Or it could say, you know, we should just send this back to council and say, guys, we think you're making a mistake. Is it, you know, you sure you want to sell this property? Or something to that effect. And, you know, council might reconsider the decision, but and Jeff's right, ultimately, that if we're trying to do something with parks, for example, if we were to come in and somebody has a great idea for what should be done with this property in the area of parks, then we should kick it right back to council and say,
Parks Committee.
And well, but council has to refer it to the Parks Committee.
Okay.
So it would, you know, council would say, yeah, okay, we hadn't thought of that before. Let's ask our Parks Committee to take a look at that and see if that's something they want to do, see if it's something we can afford to do, whatever. But so I'd like to give it one more month just to percolate, because it's really the first time this matter has been in front of this group. And we're all just kind of reacting now. For some of us, of course, we've had it in front of us for a while. But maybe if we just if we get another month under our belt, and we also then do some affirmative outreach to try to get ideas to come in, that then we'll be in a better position to make our decision.
Don, I like that approach. I mean, we're not under any huge time restraints from the village council through the ordinance or otherwise. So getting feedback is always beneficial. I would also suggest that in that month's time or 2 months' time, whatever it winds up being, that the executive director do something to determine what the market value of the property might be. I mean, if we find through an informal or even formal appraisal that it's only worth on the market $10,000 or $5,000 or even $20,000, that would help me in the decision. I mean, $20,000 is much less than the $46,000, which I think is the benchmark that we're using for a return on this property. If we can't even get close to that, then I would be more inclined to hold on to it and fold it into a long-term master or comprehensive plan for the whole park district or the park system.
If the CIC ultimately elects to decline to accept this, I would suggest that you have a companion resolution that rather than just deny this one, you have one that kind of explains why you declined it at this time, because things change and reasons change. And there may be a time in the future where the council says, hey, we're looking at this again for some reason. We want to give it to the CIC, and everybody can look back at the documentation and say, we tried once, they said no, but here's why they did. It's the same reason, or it's a different reason this time. So let's go ahead and move forward, or not. Let's not do the same thing twice, just to be able to develop that history rather than this all getting lost.
Well, I think
that's the direction it goes.
I think it is also possible that if we were to send this matter back to council saying, here's some other uses for this property, have you thought about that? And if council were then to turn around and say, we didn't think of it before, we don't like the ideas now, and we really want you to sell this property, that kind of takes the policy monkey off our backs. And then this group can just say, okay, our job is to sell this piece of property. And that to me is like I've said before, that was the primary reason the organization was created in the first place. And, we are human beings, and we're sitting here. We've got some real issues that have been put in front of us, and we want to think about them for a while, and that's a perfectly understandable thing to do.
So would it be the case then, procedurally, that Jeff would have this issue before his committee, and that if he has a committee meeting, that residents can come to the meeting for their input, or what's your vision of that?
I wish I had that good a vision. It's certainly possible that Jeff at a committee meeting could say, this matter is in front of the GCIC now. They want to sell this piece of property that's adjacent to Summit Park. And do we foresee any value for this property vis-a-vis the park? And then the committee could even reach out to people and say, what do you think? And ultimately then come back with a report to, I don't know if they would report to council first or to us. My vision is getting cloudy now. But one way or another, the word would get back to this group about what the Parks Committee felt.
If Jeff would recommend, say, a policy that, recommend to council that, under these circumstances, village property can be sold, A, B, C, D, certain limits, whatever the committee comes up with, and then makes a recommendation to the full council for an approval on a policy issue.
That could happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my question, really. What's the process? So people know what the process is.
All right. Any further discussion? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
To adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned.